There was an idea
to bring together a group of remarkable people.
To see if we could become something more.
So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
You guys ever hear some news or see a trailer or see like an actual finished movie and think to yourself, why would they do that? What would compel someone to dump that much money into that? How did this get pitched in a boardroom somewhere and get no pushback? These are all questions that come up the more media you take in. Wait, they want to reboot The Matrix with Ariana Grande? What?
Intriguing.
Sometimes you even think to yourself like your dad saying he could coach his favorite football team better than whatever idiot they currently have in charge, that if you were a Hollywood producer, you would have seen this coming from a mile away. You would have never greenlight this. Put me in, coach, I'm ready. And, you know, like your dad and his not-so-secret ambitions to hold that clipboard and get Gatorade dumped on him, you probably can't actually do a better job than the guys in charge right now. Doesn't mean that those people are doing a good job and can't be criticized, but I mean, the hell do you know? You're just some asshole, and you know what? That's fine too. In fact, that's our job, fellas. Those of us brave enough to sit on our couch and absorb an embarrassing amount of media have the responsibility, nay, the duty, to complain about everything that comes across our screens. It's a delicate ecosystem, and we all have a part to play to maintain the balance.
And when you take on the responsibility, great power will come.
All that being said though, I'm pretty sure I can run Sony Pictures better than whoever they have in charge right now. Just gonna throw that out there. If anybody at the next shareholders meeting wants to throw my hat in the ring, I'm not gonna say no. In fact, I might be so inclined to humbly accept said offer. Just saying, think about it. I'm only a two-time college dropout.
Intriguing.
So yes, in a year in which both DC and the MCU decided to take a step back and reload for the future, the geniuses over at Sony decided that this was the perfect opportunity to unload all their no doubt smash hit blockbusters on all of our faces. I'm talking not just one, not two, but 3 entries into the Sony Spider-Man spin-off universe, or whatever it's called. A universe that, as we all know, despite the name, oddly does not feature Spider-Man. But hey, maybe that's on us. I mean, why would you assume that a thing called the Sony Spider-Man universe would feature a character named Spider-Man? I mean, what are you, stupid?
I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think.
And after the year was up and all 3 of these movies shockingly did not end up breaking the bank, the news came down from up top that after 7 years and 6 movies, there were no more plans for future content in this universe.
And Jesus wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer.
Now, I've talked about the so-called SSU a few times in the past, and both times I think I've failed to illustrate that the SSU really isn't, or I guess wasn't, a cinematic universe in the same way the MCU is, or like the DCEU was. You see, those projects revolved around building up a major character like an Iron Man, or a Captain America, or a Superman, as these tent poles to then slowly, or in the case of the DCEU, very quickly expand the universe around them and build it to a point where it's this massive, interconnected, shared world to then mine endless content from. They had long-term plans, overarching narratives, giant multi-movie deals with their stars, the whole thing. The SSU, on the other hand, was never really that. I mean, I guess the initial conception way back when was to use the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man as the pillar to build a universe around, but as it actually existed in this run of movies, it's much better described as this loose string of films that have a similar-ish style and tone, and obviously this common origin point, but don't actually connect in any meaningful, tangible way, and never had any real plans for major franchise building. They're connected more by things completely outside of the movies than anything actually in them. I mean, you take away a couple of random throwaway end credit stingers, and there is quite literally nothing that would make you think that this is all part of some long-term franchise plan plan, or even part of a Spider-Man universe for that matter. I mean, if you boil them down, they're just a bunch of random shitty movies that can vaguely be described as comic book or superhero films. They're that hollow. It's just a bunch of bullshit. They're nothing. And I bring that up because in a weird way, that is what makes this universe, if we can even call it that, actually kind of interesting and worth talking about. Granted, not that interesting. I mean, you can still only get so much out of something like this, but it's this amazing little anomaly that exists in the wake of the 2010s explosion of cinematic universe filmmaking, in which this group of directors and actors and producers have all been forced to apply that way of filmmaking to a collection of movies that simply do not fit that model in any way. Like, I've seen people bring up that they feel like movies that should have come out in like the early 2000s, like Catwoman or Daredevil or like the Blade sequels, and that's a great comparison for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the consistent attitude of making them feel as far away from their comic book roots as humanly possible. But the thing about those movies is that they never tried to make any of them part of this massive shared universe or franchise. Hell, most of them didn't even get a sequel. They came out, they bombed, they sucked, everyone made fun of them, and that was that. Such is the life of a shitty movie. But these Sony films not only continued to come out despite any negative reception, but seemed to also be immune from learning why they were never able to get off the ground. Even now, they seem to have no grasp as to why it all failed, as if it was all totally out of their control and people just didn't get it. It's all made this universe this one-of-one totally unique piece of garbage, something that should have never gotten off the ground and certainly should have never lasted as long as it did. Like, this might be the only universe in which this thing exists, which, might mean we're not in the best timeline here, but hey, we could be in the funniest one, which, I guess is the second best option, maybe? It's all just kind of unbelievable, which is why the title of this video really isn't accurate. There is no autopsy necessary. It isn't like The Hobbit or the DCEU or any number of other franchises that somehow lost their way or blew this golden opportunity. No, there was never anything to blow. This was a dud of an idea from the start, which makes exhuming its corpse all the more interesting because nothing really went wrong. It all played out exactly as it should have, and the only parties that need questioning is anyone who thought it would go any different. So, for nostalgia's sake, let's take one more lap around the SSU's grave and reminisce about how profoundly weird this whole embarrassing display was.
Like a turd in the wind.
Now, being that there were only 6 entries into this franchise, when it comes to discussing them and analyzing them, they can be neatly organized into 2 very clear categories. The Venom trilogy, which makes up half the universe, and everything else. Everything else being, of course, Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter. Now, this divide doesn't just work so well because of the obvious trilogy non-trilogy part, but even more so by how much these 2 areas of the SSU differ. In fact, they differ quite a lot more than you would think. Like, they are essentially entirely different types of movies on every level, and if not for the corporate insistence of tying them all together, you would have never assumed they were all part of the same world. Again, another example of how this quote-unquote cinematic universe really has no business being called a cinematic universe. We'll go ahead and start with the Venom films, as those are, I guess, relatively easy to digest, at least compared to the other 3. Those other ones, man, yeah, it's a whole other thing going on that side of the room. They're also, with the exception of Venom the Last Dance, the most watchable of the bunch. Like, on the most surface, empty, turn your brain off, popcorn movie level, the first 2 films are fine enough. I mean, they aren't good, obviously, but the real indictment is that they are the best this franchise has to offer, which, dear God, if that is true about any series, shit is pretty grim. Venom Let There Be Carnage simply should not be allowed to be number 1 on any list, and yet, here we are.
Fools!
Can you stop doing that? Fools! Jesus, stop doing that. Come on, stop doing that. I have a dead. God damn it, fine!
Anyway, though, they follow the character of Eddie Brock, played by everyone's favorite, perfectly articulate actor Tom Hardy.
And as for the cane, don't worry about it. That's just my sciatica. It always plays up around the winter and the summer solstice.
Now, if you were to just look at these movies from like a bird's eye view, what you would see are films that appear to be no different from your typical superhero origin story in a few sequels. First film, you got your hero, Eddie Brock. That's this renegade, tough-nosed reporter that doesn't follow the rules and is off book and wants to use his job to help people and shake up the system. He stands up to not Elon Musk and his boss and is willing to do anything for this story, and even gives up his job at the end to focus on the written word.
I want to concentrate on the written word.
Perhaps he should focus on the spoken word first.
Nah.
Yeah.
You're lucky to have me, to be fair. I'm quite catching.
He has an on-again, off-again thing with Michelle Williams. He's down on his luck. He's kind of a loser, but he's got that special something in him that, with the right control and focus, can lead him to being a true hero. Which, of course, eventually comes true when an alien symbiotic pile of black goop bonds to him, and together they save the world from even more alien goo monsters. Pretty much exactly what you expect out of a superhero origin.
Hey, don't give up on her. Either of you.
We won't.
Then, in the sequel, you get even more of the same with him still being a bit of a schlub, but is of course still his usual hero self. He has an internal conflict with the symbiote that results in an Act 2 breakup that eventually works itself out. And all the while, a red version of our hero is on the run and tearing shit up and eventually must be defeated. Again, all pretty normal.
Sometimes they didn't like each other a whole lot, but ultimately, they worked together to bring out the best in each other.
And then finally, in the third film, the two friends are on the run and running out of time as they race to save the world yet again. This time from a bad guy that is quite literally not in the movie. More on that later. Point being, if you just describe these movies to someone who hasn't seen them, they come off pretty generic and normal, and to an extent that is true. I mean, the basic premises and template for the comic book movie genre is being followed in all of them. The bones of the Venom films are very normal. What's not normal, and what makes these movies very unique, is everything else. You kind of have to see them to understand what I'm talking about, but they're some of, if not the strangest superhero films ever made. They get real fucking weird, and not in like a silly fun way, more of the kind of weird vibe you get when you're hanging out with like a friend of a friend that you don't know but you're stuck with for an evening, and they appear to be always on edge and just seem ready to snap at any moment, and you do your best to try to avoid them at all times. That kind of weird. The guy who asks you if you think he's crazy weird. Oddly enough, those are the people I imagine are the biggest fans of these movies. Actually, yeah, makes a lot of sense now based on who I know in real life that likes them. Yep, that tracks.
But I can talk about the Dadaist patterns of arterial spray.
You will have a hangover and a desperate need for a shower after watching a Venom film. This unique vibe is achieved almost entirely through the weird casting of Tom Hardy. Now, Tom Hardy, as we all know, is a very good actor, often gets deep into his roles, and clearly has no sense of vanity as he is willing to cover his face up with damn near anything, and hell, he doesn't even need to speak all that much to sell himself. All around, pretty impressive talent. So, what about this casting is an issue? Well, it's not so much his ability that's the problem here, but just the simple fact that the Eddie Brock character as written in these movies is more or less a normal guy, which just so happens to be the one kind of character Tom Hardy should never play, as evident by all of this.
Yeah, well, MIT? Woo! Okay, I'm 24. That's still extremely young, right? You create the life foundation.
It didn't happen overnight.
And then rockets, you then decide, like any normal human being, that you're gonna go and explore space.
He comes off like a drug-addicted, insane, homeless guy, but again, only by how he acts, not by any of the dialogue, because people talk about him like he's this normal, everyday guy, but then you see him in action, and it's like your weird uncle went on a bender in San Francisco and has been wandering the streets ever since. It's a vibe that just does not work with a superhero, or even a villain or an anti-hero. It's not a thing that you see in these kinds of movies. For good reason, mind you. So as a result, the films feel like these bizarre fever dreams where you experience them and come out thinking, did I just watch Tom Hardy jump into a lobster tank and talk to an alien goop pile about eating people's brains? Why yes, as a matter of fact, yes you did. It is pure, unchecked insanity that becomes even more strange when it's run up against this otherwise normal premise for a movie. It's kind of like how So Bad They're Good movies can only come out of people who think they're actually making a good one. It's the same logic here, where truly insane movies can only come from projects that the people making them thought they were making something normal. This is what Tom Hardy thinks a regular person acts like. It's amazing.
I hope you don't get disappointed, you know, and I hope that if you do find one, I hope you meet a really good alien, not a bad one.
It's not even a case of an actor just half-assing it or not trying, and that's why it comes off so weird, because Tom Hardy is not only the star, obviously, but also a producer of all three of them, and also has a credit for the story by for both sequels, which means that this man took time out of his day to workshop the story for Venom Let There Be Carnage and Venom The Last Dance. For better or for worse, this guy gives a shit about these movies, and yet this is how he chooses to play the lead character. You just don't see stuff like this, folks.
Wow, little old Miss Chen is a little old blackmailer, huh?
Now, there really isn't a whole lot to say in regard to the first two films, aside from just pointing out the obvious in that they're real damn weird, like, why is this in there? That's an odd choice, but the third one is where things get interesting, and by interesting, I mean totally fucking awful.
Surprise, Horsey! I love horses!
Now, this may come as a shock to you and maybe even be considered a bit of a hot take here, but I've run the numbers and I think I've come to the conclusion that Venom The Last Dance is perhaps the single worst movie in the SSU. I am fully aware that that is a statement to make, but, you know, I just can't deny reality. I mean, it's either that or Morbius, and yes, most shocking of all, that does mean that I don't think Madam Web is in that conversation, which is saying a whole lot considering the quality of that hit film. But the competition at the bottom of the SSU is just too damn stiff.
Intriguing.
Full disclosure, I was planning on doing an entire video on Venom The Last Dance to follow up my previous SSU videos, but when I went and saw it, I was just so taken aback by how truly awful it was that I just couldn't do it. Maybe that's my weakness as a content creator, but when something is this bad and this off-putting, and more importantly, this empty, I find it very difficult to muster up the drive to make content about it. You know, you need something to go off of, and most bad things I talk about, and most people talk about, have that, but this is just the worst fucking thing ever. I'm pretty sure it's the worst thing I saw last year, which is not saying nothing because I saw like 70 movies last year, including a Hot Frosty, so take that for what you will.
All right, you ready for me? I'm ready. Here I go. Okay. Yeah. Oh, it's working. Okay, great. Good. Oh, if the girls could see me now.
If the first two Venom films are like a bad high, then Venom 3 is like coming down from said bad high and just wallowing in your own self-pity. It's still crazy, it's still stupid, Tom Hardy is still doing his weird Tom Hardy thing, but the novelty of them has completely worn off and you feel mostly embarrassed watching it. It's that same feeling you get when you rewatch a movie you loved as a kid and then come to realize it actually kind of sucks, except in this case, it's also the first time you're watching it. In short, this movie is terrible. Unlike Venom 2, where they clearly had an idea of where to go with it from the end of the first movie, Venom 3 feels like they had nothing aside from the cameo from No Way Home, so that's just where they started. Problem is though, if you're familiar with that cameo, cute and fun as it may be, it's not exactly a starting point for a movie, or so I thought at least, but hey, what do I know? It picks up literally where that cameo left off, to the point where Tom Hardy is wearing the same outfit from that scene for the entire film. Almost like he's doing the old Adam Sandler bit of making sure all of his films are about his character on vacation so he can just lounge in his usual everyday attire. So if that's the case, respect Tom Hardy, pretty fucking cool.
We only have this shitty shirt. You got one boot. Sunburn.
So yeah, he zips back to his own universe and suddenly is on the run for some reason and wants to go to New York because, why do you want to go to New York? Oh yeah, he wants to show Venom the Statue of Liberty and clear his name somehow. I don't know, whatever. So he has to go to New York, and then he decides, okay, I'm gonna hitchhike on a plane and just fly all the way there. Great. But then, oh no, this different alien symbiote thing comes crashing down and knocks him off the airplane. And also Chiwetel Ejiofor is after him too, so he's got these two parties chasing him down. So his next plan is to hoof it all the way there from the southwestern US, and then he spends like 30 minutes hitchhiking with Rhys Ifans and his alien-pilled family. And then he gets to Vegas, and then he finally gets some new clothes and has a dance with the convenience store woman from the previous two movies, who's there for some reason, whatever. Then he gets spirited away to a secret Area 51 underneath the actual Area 51, and turns out there's just symbiotes galore going on under there. And also, I think this is when we find out that there is also this evil alien symbiote god in space that wants all the other symbiotes to return to him or maybe conquer the Earth. It's one of those two options. Not important. Key point to keep in mind here though, our heroes have literally no interaction with him the entire film, and he has like 2 scenes total, so I'm not even sure why he's here in the first place, but whatever. Then Venom blows himself up to save the day, and Tom Hardy's no longer all gooped up. Then he goes to New York, and yeah, the end. That's your movie. It is as captivating as I make it sound.
Intriguing.
And I think for me, what makes it the worst of the bunch, or at least my personal most hated of all of them, is that unlike films like Madam Web or Morbius or Craven that end up the way they did, mostly by sheer incompetence, lack of talent, and a overall gross misplacement of funds, Venom 3 feels like they just gave up. Kind of like how Taika Waititi gave up for Thor Love and Thunder, but even worse since at least he was starting from a good movie in Thor 3 and, you know, has actual talent and skill when he wants to use it. But when Venom 2 is the peak of the mountain that you're then dropping off from, you are in for a rough time.
That was delicious!
Folks, Sony is not sending their best here, and the fact that these movies made as much as they did does not bode well for the future of any of this shit. In fact, it's most likely what's keeping them believing that people actually want to see any of this. Which, to be fair, I guess some people do, because all 3 of them made their money back and then some, so at the very least, they're not total embarrassments. What they are really just your average, run-of-the-mill shit movies that just so happen to find their market. Tom Hardy and friends are just out here trying to buy a new house. Can you blame them? No. And really, when people talk about the meme that is the Sony Spider-Man universe, what they're really talking about is the other movies.
Intriguing.
Yes, while the Venom movies on their face may be just as worthy of bullying as these ones we're about to get to here, their strange and inexplicable ability to make money does kind of elevate them above the rest. Granted, not by a whole lot, but when your competition is Madam Web, you're gonna look pretty good by comparison. And you know, maybe that's the real takeaway here. No one has benefited from Madam Web, Morbius, and Kraven the Hunter more than the crew over at Venom HQ. Kind of all makes sense now, actually. Is Tom Hardy behind all this? Perhaps, but that is a question for a different day. For now, we got some juicy garbage to sink our teeth into.
They say he uses a connection with animals to track his prey. And once you're on his list, there's only one way off.
These 3 movies right here represent the icon of Sony's incompetence as a movie studio. Unlike Venom, they aren't just your typical bad run-of-the-mill superhero movies. No, they are so much more than that. Movies so bad that they have been uniquely identified and collectively bullied by the internet and society at large in the most brutal ways a series of films can be. You start with Morbius, and the bullying manifests itself in the form of attention. Not so bad, you know, there's memes about people liking it ironically, YouTubers talking about how bad it is. For a few weeks, the internet was ablaze with Morbius fever. This is obviously not ideal for your movie, but hey, there's no such thing as bad press, or at least that's what Sony thought. I mean, mean, at the very least, people were talking about it, and that's a whole lot more than most bad movies get. So they shot their shot, and after its initial theatrical run was over, and they saw all the attention it was getting online, they decided in their infinite wisdom to put it back in theaters to collect that ironic shithead money, only for it to bomb yet again, leading to even more hilarity. No way around it. That's pretty embarrassing. But that was just round one of this 2.5-year bullying saga. Next up came Madame Web. Now this time around, the bullying started a bit earlier than expected, not when it was close to release like with Morbius, but when the first trailer dropped and this beautiful line delivery was given to the world.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Now you would think that based on the reaction to the trailer that Madame Web would meet a similar fate as Morbius, where we would have this weeks-long saga where Sony would be tricked into thinking that people actually like this. But that's not what ended up happening. The trailer dropped and people did the whole routine, but as time went by and the movie actually came out, it was met with a much more tepid reaction than Morbius. Sure, it was getting a few jabs here and there, and idiots like me went and saw it ironically. I mean, people were talking about it, but relative to the world-class level of corporate bullying we saw with Morbius, it was just a lot less fun the second time around. People just didn't care as much. It kind of just came and went with minimal to no impact. And then finally, when the man came around in Kraven the Hunter, the bullying came in the form of people just not caring at all. Yes, it was just as bad and stupid and worthy of bullying, but when you do this shit 3 times in a row as a studio, even if all these movies deserve it, at a certain point, the public just gives up. It's just sad after a while. You're just watching these people try and try and try, and the more they fail, it becomes less fun. You know, it's like playing t-ball.
The Kravinoff hit failed. All of our guys are dead.
So Kraven came and went with not much more than a peep from the very same people who gave all their ironic energy to Morbius not all that long ago. It got the worst fate of all three, to be totally and completely ignored. So ignored that it finally closed the book on this whole stupid project altogether.
What do you do for work, exactly?
I hunt. People.
But perhaps most embarrassing of all, and what most people won't tell you about these 3 movies, is that none of them, not even Morbius, were worth the effort and time we all gave them.
Intriguing.
Now we can put a pin in Madame Web and come back to that one later, because to its credit, that one does have a few of the elements of a uniquely bad movie that makes it, kind of interesting. But as for Morbius and Kraven the Hunter, there's just nothing there. They aren't funny bad or so bad that you see the obvious flaws in them, like the editing or the lighting or, basic shit like that. They don't have any standout, horribly bad performances or moments that can be mined for memes. The quick review of both of them is that they're just boring, flatly. They are completely hollow and not in the least bit worth talking about on any level. Like, if I was tasked with making a video about just Kraven the Hunter, I don't know if I could do it because there is quite literally nothing to talk about. It's just a boring, bland-ass movie, the kind of bad movie we see come out on some platform or another virtually every other week. And with Morbius, the only thing to talk about with that one is all the hilarity surrounding its release and re-release. But again, the movie itself has less than nothing to offer. No one has ever uttered so much as a peep about the actual plot of Morbius. Unless you have seen the movie yourself, you know nothing about it because no one has ever talked about it. And it is not nearly as fun to watch as you might think based on all the attention it got back when it came out. In fact, the medium I would recommend you absorb either of these 2 movies is the one you're watching right now. Whether it's this video or someone else's, the only way to get something out of these movies is to listen to someone else talk about them in like 20% of the time it would take to actually watch them yourself. That's the only way, because the only thing interesting to them is the culture surrounding them. How they somehow got greenlit, how people found it funny they existed, how Sony thought they would be these record-breaking blockbuster epics like The Avengers. Films that aren't just not good, but feel as generic and lazy and out of their time as anything like it can be. In a way, it's kind of this unintentional masterclass in getting attention relative to what they were actually putting out. But that's pretty much it. The only one that is really worth talking about and maybe watching, like I said, is Madam Web. That one, when you watch it, is genuinely baffling. It makes you wonder how it got made. Everything from Dakota Johnson's strange, ironic acting to the terrible use of ADR to cover up what was clearly a mangled movie that was changed wholesale in the edit, the whole plot revolving around the birth of Peter Parker as this messiah-like figure, a character that again is not a part of this universe, and despite being the linchpin for the movie, is not actually named once during it. Both Sydney Sweeney and Dakota Johnson supposedly thinking they were joining the MCU when they said yes to this project, their ridiculous attempts at building Spider People lore in the Amazon. I mean, there is just so much to glom onto here.
I just want to go home and watch Idol.
These movies are at their most hilarious and enjoyable when they try to actually build up the lore, because that's when they make all the weird choices that have made this franchise infamous. The plots and characters are as empty as anything, but when they do stuff like bring in the Michael Keaton Vulture character from the MCU for some random, totally meaningless end credit stinger, that's when you get some gold. Both for how cute it is that they thought this could go anywhere, but also for how genuinely stupid all their ideas were. Like, did they really think that Madam Web was going to be this ever-present character in future Spider-Man installments and all these people were going to get their own Spider People spin-off movies? What, is Dakota Johnson going to check in once a year in her goofy-ass Madam Web outfit and give our heroes some advice or whatever? I mean, there's just no way, right? Or that Morbius and Venom and Kraven and Vulture were gonna team up to do some Sinister Six type thing, despite most of them not actually being villains in these movies, and also to fight who? Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, some new Spider-Man altogether? Would they have even fought a Spider-Man at all? Was that ever a plan? Why were they holding on to this Sinister Six idea for over a decade? Was all the Spider People lore and the multiverse hopping and whatever they were setting up at the end of Kraven supposed to go anywhere, or was it all some placeholder nonsense? It's all so dumb that you just can't tell, and that's the magic of these three movies. The Venom films are what they are and didn't try to be anything else, but these three all tried to expand this universe into something more, and all three of them failed in ways that seem impossible. I mean, the strangest thing of all that no one talks about is the fact that they could have used Spider-Man this whole time. Their deal with Disney did not give the MCU exclusive rights to use that character. They could have had their own Spider-Man going at the same time, or even use Tom Holland if they wanted to.
Intriguing.
I mean, yes, there is the argument that it would have oversaturated the market, it made things confusing for the consumer, and drove down profits for both companies, but while those points may be true, they come from a place of sense and logic. Two things that clearly, based on what we saw with the SSU, are not in the building over at Sony. These people were frothing at the mouth for a bite of the superhero apple, and had one of the three most popular, iconic comic book characters of all time in their back pocket, and just chose not to use him. Instead, they roll the die on characters like Madam Web, who literally don't even have their own comic book line and have less than zero name recognition. It is nothing short of insanity. And that is really the best way to sum these three up. Yes, they're bad. Yes, they have odd casting choices. Yes, they fail to do basic things right and feel like they were made for aliens. And that's all true. But what's unique to them and what the real collective trait they share is madness. They are a manifestation of corporate insanity. Insanity that cannot be explained or justified short of their existence being some weird experimental art piece, which at this point, I'm pretty sure is not the case. They just genuinely thought that they could make comic book films with zero effort about any random character they can pull out of their ass and cash in perpetuity until the end of time. They didn't think they had to use Spider-Man. It's a level of hubris you rarely see, and even less often see repeated this many times in spite of any actual success. And again, even now they refuse to accept the reality of the situation, which brings me to the last thing I want to talk about, the future of all this stuff. You see, being that this loose collection of movies does not exist as its own subdivision within Sony like Marvel Studios does under Disney or DC does under WB, it's not actually officially dead.
Intriguing.
It's dead in the sense that there are no immediate plans for future installments in this universe, but it's not like anyone lost their job or an entire studio went belly up or anybody actually learned a lesson here. What is happening is just Sony shifting their focus to the next Tom Holland trilogy and Spider-Verse and that Nicolas Cage Spider-Noir show and a few other things here and there. Now, you might hear that and think that that's a win or that the pain is finally over. You won't have to sit through any more awful, cringe-inducing SSU trailers that seem to show before literally every movie in the theater. That all might be true in the short term, but a devil's work is never done. Yes, we will have a few years of respite while Tom Holland rakes Sony in some more cash, but mark my words, once he and the Spider-Verse stuff is all dried up, they will be going right back to the abyss and pull from it even darker movie ideas than you could possibly imagine. I mean, if you've been following this stuff like me, you know they had more ideas in the tank. Had Craven done well, we would have gotten things like El Muerto, Silver Sable, Black Cat, that embarrassing Sinister Six team-up, Jackpot, which I had to Google who that was, so you know they were all about that idea, and who knows how much more. None of those terrible ideas are going away. They are simply biding their time to resurface when the time is most wrong.
And you know the best thing about the future? It hasn't happened yet.
So enjoy these next few years of peace while you can, because before you know it, you'll look up and see a trailer for Big Wheel starring then washed up actor Chris Pratt. Can't wait. For now though, let's spare a moment for the end of what is perhaps the single most embarrassing and pointless cinematic universe there ever was and likely ever will be. Goodbye, SSU. I'd say we'll miss you, but I don't think anyone is going to think about you at all. Happy trails.
Who the hell are you, man?
I am Venom. I'm just kidding. It's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service.